welcome back to my channel. I am finally getting around to sharing my thoughts with you on the NATASHA Denona Sunrise palette. I've had it for about a month at this point, but just haven't gotten around to sitting down and filming about it. Frankly, I think what was putting me off was that I had hyped something up in my mind of doing, 5 different looks and doing all this intricate discussion with you. And what I've decided ultimately is to just relieve the pressure off of myself, because doing multiple looks takes a ton of time, and I frankly don't have a ton of time, unfortunately. But what I'm going to do for this video, rather than doing a demonstration of me applying the eyeshadows, which I do often include when I do eyeshadow palette reviews, what I'm going to do is some more comparative type things rather than applying it to my eyes. I will explain to you what I did with my eyes today. Obviously I am wearing shades from this palette, but if you really want a demonstration or tutorial using the palette, or let's cap it at 3 looks per video. If you want that kind of video, let me know down below and I will make every effort to do that. But I just had to lower my own expectations of myself just so that I could finally get past that impasse and sit down and film. I really hope that you guys understand. It's just, I want to give you as much information as possible. I would love to do 10 look type videos, but I just honestly don't have time for it. Between working and parenting and just life in general, I just don't have time for it. So that's where we're at. Let's just put that aside for now and dive into the palette. So as you can see, it is a nice plastic case. Frankly, I really like the matte metallic kind of finish on it. I think it's really chic looking. The back of it is a bit more rubberized in feel. And initially I thought that that was going to be almost like an anti-friction kind of thing. I thought if you put it on your desk, it would prevent it from sliding, but it's not the case. It is still every bit as movable, if you will, as it would be if you put it down on this side. So I'm not quite sure why they made the choice to do that. I initially thought that would be great for working artists if they just sat there and it just added a little bit more stability for them, but it's completely non-functional. What I do like about the back though, and you can see all these little dots here, you can just pop these pans out and put them into a magnetic palette if you wanted to. Now, when you look inside, there is no wasted space in this palette, and you can see even when it's closed, it's nice and thin. So unless she comes out with more of these kinds of palettes in this size, I don't really see the functionality of that at this point. I wouldn't take the pans out of this palette to put them in a magnetic one unless I was combining 2 or more of these palettes to have them all grouped together. That's just me. So when you open it up, there is a very large mirror here. It doesn't fold all the way back, but it does open nice and wide, and wherever you put it, it is very secure, so it doesn't just flop down, which I like. As I said, there is really no wasted space in this palette, and I really do appreciate that. Sometimes when the packaging becomes far more intricate than what the shadows themselves are, it gets to be a bit much. It's cumbersome, it's difficult to store. This is nice and sleek, and I appreciate that. I also really appreciate that the shade names are listed underneath the pans rather than in that little plastic overlay that NATASHA Denona does often include in her larger palettes. So before we get into the actual shades themselves and the color story, all of that good stuff, let's do a little bit of comparing. So I'm gonna close this up. I do have one of her larger palettes. It was $162 Canadian when I purchased it. Makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit, but there it is. But they have increased their prices on Sephora, and I've noticed that a lot of different brands have been affected by that. So I believe it's now $170. This one was, I want to say it was $80 when I purchased it, and it's now $86 on the Canadian Sephora website. I believe it retails for $65 US. Before we move forward on the comparison aspect, I just want to say that when this first came out, a lot of people were talking about how it's an affordable NATASHA Denona option. It's not. $86 for a palette is not affordable. Is it more affordable than $162? Absolutely, but it doesn't put it into the affordable category. Keeping in mind that affordable is a very subjective term. What one person can afford, another person cannot necessarily. So while it does have a much more enticing and much more achievable price point than, say, these larger traditional palettes from her, it's still not affordable. And I don't think we do ourselves any favor if we sort of trick ourselves into thinking that this is. It's not a cheap palette by any stretch. It is very expensive. It's the cost of almost 2 ABH palettes put together. So not affordable, but a much nicer price point than the large ones. That's all I'm gonna say about that. So now that we've got that out of the way, you can see here that there's really not much of a size difference between the traditional size and this new, I'm gonna call it a mini, even though technically these are the minis, but I'm just gonna, for the purposes of this video, just so that I don't have to keep saying this smaller version, we're gonna call it a mini. So there's not much of a difference overall. So then when you open them up, you can see a difference in the pan size. So this is the original one. There's that plastic flap that I was talking about that it drives me absolutely mental. I do like that these larger ones fold all the way back. They're not made of plastic. It's sort of almost like a really stiff foam and then like a fake leather outer lay, but I do like that it folds back. I just find that much easier for holding purposes. But at any rate, you can see that there is a little bit of excess packaging around, particularly the outside of where the pans are housed. You do see a little bit of that in here as well, but the spacing between the pans on the Sunrise is less than over here. Overall though, neither one of these can really be accused of being packaging heavy, if you know what I mean. So when you look at the pan size, you can see that there is a difference in the size of the pans. These ones are, I wrote it down, 0.8 ounces of product. These ones are 0.67 ounces each. So honestly, not a huge difference in terms of the size. Multiply that by 15 pans and there is where you see your difference, but they certainly didn't cheap out in terms of the amount of product that you get in here. Sorry, I just had to double check some things because I looked at the size of the pans in here and these were 0.028, which made these ones sound gargantuan. So despite the fact that the Sephora website says that these are 0.67, they are in fact 0.067, and these ones are 0.08 ounces of product. So let's just get that straight, because when I looked at the size of this, I was like, how is there only like 3 grains of eyeshadow in here compared to this? So that's where we're at. Always look at the back of the palette rather than the website, because apparently the website lies. These ones retail for $33 Canadian, but there's only 5 colors. 33 times 3 takes you to 99. This one's 86. So, I mean, price per ounce, I guess, you're still getting a better deal over here than you do with this one. But regardless, even at $33, Natasha Denona is expensive. Any way you slice it, she is an expensive little brand. So that is what I wanted to tell you about the size difference in all of these, is that even though this could be called a mini palette, it's not in the sense of what her actual minis are. So you still are getting a very generous pan size. And certainly I think the typical consumer is not necessarily going to blow through a 15 pan palette in the course of a few months. Having tried to pan a palette all year, I at least can attest to the fact that it's goddamn near impossible. So there we have it. Now that we've talked about pan size and price, now I'd like to talk about the color story. So when you open up the Sunrise palette, you can see that it is very warm in nature. There are some yellows leaning to almost a yellowy orange over here. There are cranberry type shades, there's reds, golds, everything obviously is very, very warm toned. So I looked through my collection to see if I had anything similar. And I've pulled out 3 that are in the same kind of idea, but they're certainly not dupes by any stretch. So first up is the Just Peachy Mattes palette from Too Faced. Again, you can see in here that there is a bit, like quite a bit of warmth going on. You've got those pinkish, almost purpley kind of shades over here, but it is certainly lacking in terms of the yellow and more gold toned shades. Also, this is obviously all mattes. This one has a mix of finishes, so certainly not similar, although depending on what shades you choose from both, you could get a relatively similar look. But if you have this one, getting the Natasha Denona is still going to add a lot to your collection. Then I want to jump over to the Blood Sugar palette from Jeffree Star, and I want to do a little side note because there is an absolutely lovely, lovely subscriber of mine named Mary who offered to give me her Blood Sugar palette because she found that she couldn't get as much use out of it as she wanted to, and I thought that was absolutely so generous and so thoughtful of her. I already owned it, so I did politely decline. Okay, back to the palettes. So this is the Blood Sugar palette. It is bold. It is obviously very pink, red, warm toned colors in here, although there are some more neutral, coolish options in here. But overall, there is this overarching purpley red theme, and I'm knocking stuff over. But when you compare the two of them together, this one is far more bright and in your face, whereas this one is far more subdued, if you will, for still being a rather bold palette. So I feel like if this palette over here is intimidating or just overall too bright, this might be a good second option, because although it still has elements of the theme that's in the Blood Sugar palette, it is more quote-unquote wearable. Now, the last one that I'd like to compare it to is Modern Renaissance from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This is a cult classic. Again, you've got those purplish tones over here. There are some goldish kind of colors over here, and overall a rather warm palette and a warm color story. But again, not a dupe over here. This one is more vibrant and overall more warm toned than Modern Renaissance. But I find that Modern Renaissance is kind of the bridge between the Sunrise palette and the Jeffree Star Blood Sugar palette. But again, if you have any of these palettes, it doesn't necessarily preclude you from buying this one because it still fills gaps that all of the other palettes have. So there's that. So now I'm just gonna bump you in a little bit closer so that you can see what's going on my eyes and how I created this look. Then we'll do some swatches and then I'll wrap it up. So just hang tight. Okay, so there's a better look at what I have going on my eyes. And I'm just gonna walk you through what shadows I used. So first of all, in my transition, I used the shade Morning, which is this soft yellow shade down here. And then I built up the color of it a little bit with this one over here, which is called Citrine. I can't read them upside down in my viewfinder, so I have to keep flipping it, sorry. Then I built up my crease using this color here, which is called Carnelian? I don't know. This one right here, I guess, okay. Maybe I should do it this way so that you can actually read them as well. So that shade down there. Then I went in with Glory, which is this beautiful cranberry kind of shade over here. I put that onto the outer V of my eyes and then moved it around into the crease as well and blended it up a bit. I did spend quite a bit of time blending that one out so that I had nice soft edges and that it blended in with the deeper yellowy orange shade as well. Then across my lid, I did a bit of an ombre, if you will, of some of the more shimmery shadows. So I started with Poppy over here and then put Phlox in the center. And then on the inner portion, I have this shade right here, which is called Awakening. And then I patted this one here called Aster. I just used my finger and patted that onto the center of my lid just to add a little bit more sparkle and shine. Did a bunch of blending as well throughout the crease just so everything was nicely smoothed out. On my lower lashes, I applied this shade here called Clove and blended it out with a little bit of Jasper. For my brow bone highlight and my inner corner highlight, I used the shade up here called Laurel. So I was going to do swatches first, but frankly, I think it just makes sense at this point for me to talk about the experiences I've had in using these shadows. Overall, they remind me very much of the same formula that she has in her larger palettes. They are very pigmented shadows, but they blend very nicely. Most of the matte shadows don't kick up a ton, but the shade Citrine, this brighter yellow here, this one did kick up a lot of dust in the pan, but again, I could just tap off the excess and I really didn't have a problem with any sort of transfer onto my face. With the more shimmery shadows like Phlox and Poppy over here, I did have a bit of fallout from them, so I would suggest if you pick them up with a flat brush, tap off the excess, and depending on the look you're going for, if you do foil them with some setting spray, that does help to avoid the transfer from falling down onto your cheeks. But overall, I'm really impressed with the quality of these shadows. I can't say that this is a must-have. Everybody has to go out and buy this palette. Certainly if the color story speaks to you and if you have the budget for a palette of this price, you won't be disappointed. It is a very nice palette. I do find that there are a couple of shades in here that I would probably switch out for something else, but overall, I'm happy with the color selection in here. I don't think that these two were particularly necessary. I think they could have done away with one of them and maybe included something even lighter, more along the lines of like a champagne kind of color. But overall, there's nothing in here that I won't use. So let's get into the swatches because these do have different finishes and some of them are less intense when you apply them than what they look in the pan. In particular, the shade Aster over here. I would consider this to be more of a topper rather than a full-on foiled eyeshadow. So let's do the swatches. All right, so as per usual, I didn't prime my arm. I ran my finger around each pan 4 times in a circle and then did 1 swipe down, although some of the mattes I did about 2 just to even them out a bit. So starting over here, this shade here is Poppy, and then Citrine, Phlox. Phlox and Poppy are quite similar, although Poppy is a little bit deeper, whereas Phlox is a bit more of a truer red. Next up over here is Awakening, and this one is a bit of a duochrome. It's sort of a peachy gold kind of reflect, which is really pretty. Next to that one is Laurel, and then we have Aster over here, which has little bits of, I want to say like blue micro glitter in it, so it has a little bit of a shift to it, which again is really beautiful. This one over here is Glory, followed by Azalea, and then Morgan is a really pretty, I don't know how to describe it, it's like a peachy orange, like a burnt peach kind of shade, which is quite unique, but really, really pretty. Followed over here by Agate, and then we have Clove, which is the deepest one in the palette, and then Carnelian, Jasper over here, followed by Morning, and then finally Dayspring. There really isn't a dud in the group. There's none, like none of the mattes are particularly patchy. This darker one does look a little bit patchy towards the end, but it will build up quite nicely, and it does blend out beautifully as well. And the shimmery shadows are just that. They are absolutely beautiful and shimmery. I think if I was to pick my least favorite, it would be this one right here, which is called Azalea. But even at that, it's not that I particularly dislike it, it's just not my favorite of the bunch. And then, like I said, this shade and this one over here are rather similar in tone. So I would have liked to see maybe this one just a hint lighter, just to add a little bit more diversity to it, but overall not a significant complaint. So there you have it, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Sunrise palette from NATASHA Denona. If you're looking for an even lower price point, the Cranberry palette, which is still available on the Sephora website, I think it was supposed to be limited edition, but I guess that went by the wayside. You can get similar looks out of this, although obviously you're constrained by only having 5 color options, but it is a very similar color story. And I think it retails for, I want to say 65 Canadian. So it's still not affordable, but you do save 20 over this one. So just wanted to put that out there. So like I said, I don't think it's a must-have. I mean, it is beautiful. I enjoy it. I know I will wear this. These are the kind of colors that I do tend to gravitate towards. I do like warm eyeshadow colors. But overall, I mean, it's an expensive palette. And if only for that reason, I mean, I want to warn people not to get swept up into the hype of a less expensive palette, because that's not where the focus should be. The focus should be on, do these shadows appeal to you? Would you get a ton of use out of it? And also the fact that it is still a high price point for being an eyeshadow palette. There are, like I showed, there are other options that are similar, though not quite exactly the same. And certainly if you're looking for just, you know, a yellow to add in, you could either draw from other palettes or get a single to use with, say, the Modern Renaissance palette to make it a bit more like this one. So there's options out there, most definitely. But overall, I am happy with my purchase. I am happy for the performance and the quality of the shadows that are in here. I have had some issues with the minis. Some of them do not perform the way that I expect or want them to, and I have actually returned, I think, 2 of them in the past. Can't remember which ones, but I mean, the Mini Star and the Mini Lila ones in particular are fantastic, but some of the other ones have left me wanting more, particularly the Sunset, the Mini Sunset palette. But that aside, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Those are my thoughts on the palette. Again, I hope that this style of review was helpful and that you enjoyed it. If you do want to see additional looks with this, let me know. I will do, like I said, I will do my best to try to film that for you. I'm just overwhelmed with the amount of videos that I want to do. And I never believed it when I was a kid, when my parents would say, like, I just need more time in a day. And I'm like, who needs more time? Days are great. I need more time in the day. I truly do. So I do my best. At any rate, that is it. Going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, just be a decent human being. Bye for now, guys.